I would like to see the baby.
So would I.
Hey guys, it's AJ here. Welcome back to the channel. Got a new series now called Let's Paint Wizard Pants. It's just going to be me painting some of my hobby stuff for like Warhammer and some of the other things that I print and paint for friends and also myself. Today, we are printing little Baby Yoda, also known as Grogu for us cultured folk. And I 3D printed this guy on one of my 3D printers. I have a resin printer called a Frozen Sonic Mighty 8K. I also have the Mini 8KS. Just so I can kind of make them go brrr and print two things at once. So I got them all printed and assembled, and he looks great. The detail is exquisite. Take him over to the spray booth here. We're going to bust out the airbrush. With a black primer, we are going to thin it down a little bit and give him a nice, even light coat across the entire model. Because we're going to be using a painting technique. I guess nowadays people call it slap chop, but we're going to use a transparent paint and build up the highlights, midtones, and shadows with a little bit of dry brushing. And remember to clean your airbrush because it will save your life. I'm also really impatient, so I busted out the old hairdryer. We're going to get this guy dried up. Finish up the base with just another brush here. Once he is nice and dry, he looks like this. We're busting out the extra large Artist Opus round dry brush here, one of my favorite dry brushes, and a bright neutral gray from Pro Acrylic. We are going to give him a fairly good overbrush to give us a nice even coat here. Let's start on the back of the model so that if I fuck up the model, it's on the back. It's always a good starting point. Applying a moderate amount of pressure here. I want this to kind of pick up everywhere except for the darkest recesses of the model. And some of the more circular motions kind of help pick all of those details up. Our goal is to leave the black areas in the darkest parts of the model to emulate shadows. So we go pretty liberal with this all over the model. Busting out my favorite white paint called Bold Titanium White from Pro Acrylic. We're going to do the same thing now, except we're going to do less of the model. We want to use this on the areas that we want the harshest highlights. So we're going to put this more on the face and on the skin. Testing it on my thumb there to make sure I have the right amount of paint and everything. Again, let's start on the back in case we shit the bed on this. Kind of start just on the detailed areas of the face. Use a light amount of pressure. Drag this against the details. You'll start to pick up some of the highlighted areas. I want the light source to kind of feel like it's coming from that left side of his face, so we're just going to kind of focus it right there. And we just kind of blast this all over on his little fingies and robes and everything, and it will emulate highlights that we want to pick out. And here's what he looks like now that we have picked out all of the midtones and highlights and left the nice dark shadows. We're going to bust out Crusader skin from Army Painter, the first speed paint line that they released. This one does have the reactivation issues that people didn't really care for. We are actually going to use it to our advantage here. And what that means is that if you put another layer of paint on top of this one, it will actually kind of mix together and the colors will blend. We actually want that to happen. I'm putting this on the inside of his ears, and I want this eventually to kind of blend into the bottom of his earlobes and kind of, you'll see once we get the skin painted, how it kind of melds together. I'm using a liberal amount of paint here as well because I want this to sink into the recesses of his ear and create some more shadow and definition there. Plaguebearer Flesh from Citadel Contrast, one of my favorite green colors. Starting in the neck, just in case, again, we screw it up. I'm not the best painter, so I always be cautious. I'm going to slap this all over. I'm going fairly thick with this because I do want his skin to be fairly opaque, and I don't want to have to do a second coat. So we slap this all over his skin and let it sink into the details. On the bottom part of his earlobes, the paint starts to kind of mix in with the Crusader skin that we used earlier. It will kind of blend together. We're going to go back to the Crusader skin and paint the tip of his nose. Little cute little nose. Give him a little rosy cheek and rosy nose. We'll use this on the lips as well. And then carefully go around just the outside of the eyelids. Bony Matter is one of my favorite speed paints. I'm going to slap this all over the little furry part of his robes. Going pretty thick with this paint too because it is kind of a thinner, less opaque speed paint. I want this to fill in all the details of his fur, and I think it does a great job. Ruddy fur is going to go on the robes, and this is where I kind of made a mistake. Speed paints and contrast paints don't really go over well on smooth, less detailed areas, so it kind of gave me a more splotchy, stainy look. So I busted out some of the Army Painter Fanatic paints, and I just went with a traditional layer. Ended up doing 2 coats of this all over the robe. And then I busted out Brigandine Brown and thinned it down with some more paint stabilizer. Went into the deepest recesses and painted in the shadows. Now, again, I'm not an amazing painter. I'm not good at this, so I'm still learning. And, you know, comment below if you have any tips or tricks on how I can do better at this, or maybe cut out a couple steps. You'll see I'm just sort of targeting all of the shadow areas. I'm using Sepia Tone, which is a wash, and I put this all over to blend in the shadow with the mid-tone now that I have established. And I feel like I could have waited to do this step until I did maybe one other step next, but I did it, so here it is. Bootstrap Brown is another color in this Fanatic range, and I'm using this butted up right next to the shadows to make this transition a little bit more seamless. Just using kind of a jagged, more stipply brush motion kind of helps the texture of the robes a little bit, I feel like. And then I went back with the Sepia Tone here and just in the recesses built this shadow up and blended together a little bit more. I'm just kind of experimenting here. I don't really know what the hell I'm doing. So, if I suck, I suck. I'm sorry. Leather Brown. We're going back to my favorite old dry brush technique. This is just to kind of reestablish our mid-tone again. We don't want to go into the shadows, but we do want to reestablish the color that we want for his robe. I kind of go back and forth between swiping motions and stippling motions because it does create a different texture when you stipple. And that's just kind of making a stabby motion into the model itself. Paratrooper Tan, slightly lighter brown, and we're going to just target more of the raised areas so that we can emulate another highlight, painting a little less of the model each time we use a brighter brown, and it's starting to look really nice, I think. Urban Buff. Now we're just targeting the very highest highlights here. We just want to create that contrast between the shadows and the mid-tone. Just going against his little jacket. The folds of his robe can really pop nicely if we just aim at those specific areas. Less circular motions and more just straight against the folds of the robe. Whole matte black. I wish I would have thinned this down a little bit more than I did, but we're using it to paint his eyeballs. I am 100% horrible at painting eyes, so yeah. We're going to do our best to paint in the eyes without ruining this model. The reason I wish I would have thinned it just a little bit more, because I feel like after I finished it, there was a slight texture to his eyes, and I would have liked them to be nice and smooth. Now back to Bootstrap Brown. We're going to use this to paint the iris in on his eye. So I kind of go back and forth between the brown and the black and try to refine this, but again, this is what I fear.
Time heals all things. Except these crazy eyes.
Yeah, crazy eyes. So yeah, I just kind of go back and forth trying to clean this up as best I can. Luckily, Grogu's eyes are fairly dark in the show, but I want them to look cute, not like he's a psychopath or Steve Buscemi from Mr. Deeds. We're going to do our best to straighten them up a little bit. And I think I did okay. He doesn't look like a crazed lunatic. I used evergreen fog to bring in some color into his iris, and I've never painted an iris because typically everything that I paint is so small that there is no iris to paint. So I just kind of went in and made some tiny brush strokes in there to kind of bring in some color. I could have spent a little more time on this, but I didn't, and I'm okay with it. Gloss varnish from Vallejo, putting this all over the eyes to make it look all glistening and cute. And it's a small detail, but I really think it makes a big difference when you can see the light reflecting in his eyes. And this is where I noticed that I'd wish I had thinned the paint that I used on the eyes a little bit more, because you can kind of see some of the textures when the gloss varnish is put on, but it's really not that noticeable. Bony matter again. I went back and wanted to paint his fingernails. I did 2 coats of this on each of the fingernails, and the nice part about them already being green from the color that we did before is that the color isn't super drastic of a difference. Vallejo Metal Colors Steel. If you've never used these metallic paints before, you really should. They just go on so creamy and smooth, and they're a joy to work with. And so I'm just slapping this all over the base. We're going to use rich gold, one of my favorite gold colors from Pro Acryl, to paint the Star Wars logo. I did do 2 coats of this to achieve full opacity. I'm using Vallejo Earth Texture. This is a desert sand. I just happen to have it laying around. I grabbed an old crusty brush and slapped this on the base. You don't want this to go on smooth. You kind of want to give it a bunch of texture and kind of smush it in, and once it dries, it leaves a nice earthy texture. Put a black wash on the base here, and I wanted to just give it a slightly different tone from the outer portion of the base. Brown wash, Pro Acryl, putting this over the top of the Star Wars logo, really just to kind of tie it in around the letters. I wiped off the top of the letters because I don't want to cover up too much of that gold. Mithril Silver from Army Painter Fanatics range. Grabbed a crappy old brush. I don't need this to have a fine point because I'm just going to add scratches onto this base to give it a little patina, a little life weathered look. I think it makes a huge difference when it doesn't look as clean, and I really like the detail that it added. Back to sepia tone, and we're going to slap this onto the desert base. I'm using a nice thick coat here because I want it to settle into the recesses of the sand, really pop that contrast up a bit. Pale sand, convenient. I'm going to use this to dry brush a final highlight onto the sand, just to pick up the highlights of the sand. Very light amount of pressure here. We just want to reach the very top to emulate little Baby Yoda on Tatooine. Some Army Painter mountain tufts. I stole the wife's tweezers and grabbed these self-adhesive little grass clumps and placed them onto the model. The mountain tufts have kind of a dead grass look, and it works perfectly. And here he is. He looks great. I'm really happy with it, and here's the final money shot in all of its glory. Turned out really great. Like I said, I'm not an amazing painter, but doing projects like this is really kind of therapeutic in a way, so you'll see me doing more of this on my channel, and if you do like it, hit the thumbs up and subscribe, and give me some suggestions on what you'd like me to paint. And we'll see you in the next video. Love you, bye.